The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered boards of Sarah Jane Hestwood's porch, each plank groaning under the weight of neglect and poverty. She sat there most mornings, watching the dust devils dance across the barren stretch of land that had once been her husband's dream. Now it was nothing more than a monument to debt and despair. Sarah's calloused fingers worked mechanically at the torn hem of her only decent dress. The black fabric faded to a dusty gray after 3 years of mourning. At 32, she looked closer to 50, her face etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and empty stomachs. The townspeople of Sanctuary had long since stopped seeing her as a woman. She was a ghost. A cautionary tale whispered about in the general store, the widow who couldn't pay her debts, couldn't work the land, couldn't find another man willing to take on her burdens. The morning started like any other, with Sarah counting the few coins left in her late husband Thomas's tobacco tin. $8.37 stood between her and complete destitution. The mortgage payment was $40, due in 2 weeks. The arithmetic of survival had become her only mathematics, and the numbers never added up in her favor. She heard them before she saw them, the thunder of hooves and the coarse laughter that always accompanied Silas Kane and his men. Her stomach clenched involuntarily. Kane owned half of Sanctuary and held the mortgages on the other half. He was a man who collected debts like trophies, displaying the misfortune of others as proof of his own success.
Well, Mrs. Hestwood.
Kane's voice boomed across the dusty yard as he dismounted, his expensive boots hitting the ground with deliberate force. He was a large man, soft around the middle from good living, with pale eyes that never quite met yours directly. I trust you're enjoying this fine morning. Sarah stood slowly, her back straight despite everything. Pride was free, and it was all she had left. Mr. Kane, to what do I owe the pleasure? The question was rhetorical. They both knew why he was here to remind her of what she owed, to squeeze whatever dignity remained from her like water from a stone. Just making my rounds, checking on my investments. He emphasized the word "my" with particular relish. 3 men flanked him, each one grinning like coyotes who'd cornered a rabbit. Jake Morrison, Billy Hayworth, and Sam Doc Pritchard, men who'd found their fortune in Kane's shadow and never questioned the price. "Your payment ain't due for 2 weeks," Sarah said quietly. No, I'm not here about money today." Kane's grin widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "I've brought you something. Call it a gesture of goodwill. Boys, bring out Mrs. Hestwood's gift." The word "gift" from Silas Kane's mouth sounded like a threat, and Sarah's hands unconsciously gripped the porch railing. Morrison and Hayworth disappeared behind the wagon they'd brought, and she heard a strange scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across wood. What they hauled into view made her blood turn cold. It was a man, or what remained of one, an Apache warrior, from the look of his long black hair and the remnants of traditional dress. But he was broken in a way that made Sarah's breath catch. His body lay motionless on a makeshift travois, his limbs arranged at angles that spoke of complete paralysis. Only his eyes moved, dark and burning with a hatred so pure it seemed to scorch the very air. "Found him out near Skeleton Canyon," Kane announced with the casual tone of a man discussing cattle prices. "Apparently, he took a bad fall running from the cavalry. Broke his back clean through. Can't move nothing below the neck. They say the boys at Fort Buchanan didn't want to waste resources on him, seeing as how he's just another savage." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. What has this got to do with me?" "Well now, that's the beautiful part." Kane's grin stretched impossibly wider. "See, I figured you being a Christian woman and all, you'd want to do your duty. Plus, you're always saying you need help around here. So I thought, why not give Mrs. Hestwood her very own ranch hand?" The men burst into laughter at this, slapping their thighs as if it were the finest joke ever told. The Apache's eyes found Sarah's, and in them she saw not plea for help but pure contempt for her, for them, for the entire situation. "I can't." Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Mr. Kane, I can barely feed myself." "Oh, don't you worry about that. He don't eat much. Can't exactly run to the dinner table, can he?" More laughter. "Besides, think of it as an opportunity. You help this poor soul. Maybe the Lord will see fit to help you. Might even reduce that debt of yours if you show proper Christian charity." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. This wasn't charity, it was cruelty dressed up in righteousness. Cain wanted to humiliate her further, to make her the caretaker of a broken man as some sort of twisted entertainment for the town. "And if I refuse?" Cain's jovial mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Well now, that wouldn't be very neighborly. Would it? Might make folks think you're not the kind of person we want in sanctuary. Might make me reconsider the terms of your loan." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Sarah looked again at the Apache warrior. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and she could see the toll that hatred was taking on him, burning him up from the inside like fever. He was dying, slowly but surely, and Cain knew it. This was meant to be her final humiliation, nursemaid to a paralyzed enemy until death claimed him. All while the town watched and whispered. "Leave him on the porch," she heard herself say, the words seeming to come from somewhere outside her body. "What was that?" Cain cupped his ear theatrically. "I said leave him on the porch." Her voice was stronger now, fueled by a sudden, irrational anger. If this was to be her crucifixion, she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her weep. The men dragged the travois up onto the porch, grunting with effort. The Apache's eyes never left Sarah's face, boring into her with an intensity that should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself staring back, seeing in those dark depths a reflection of her own rage at the world's cruelty. "There we are," Cain declared, dusting off his hands as if he'd done honest work. "Mrs. Hestwood, meet your new companion. Don't know his savage name, but I'm sure you can call him whatever you like. Spot, maybe, like a good dog." The men howled at this, but Sarah didn't react. She kept her eyes on the Apache, and something passed between them, not understanding, certainly not friendship, but perhaps a recognition of shared humiliation. "Oh, and Mrs. Hestwood." Cain paused at his horse, one foot in the stirrup. "I'll be very interested to hear how this arrangement works out. Very interested indeed. The whole town will be watching." With that, they rode off in a cloud of dust and laughter, leaving Sarah alone with her impossible burden. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whisper of wind through the broken fence posts and the labored breathing of the broken man on her porch. Sarah sank down onto the top step, her legs suddenly unable to support her. She put her head in her hands and allowed herself one moment of complete despair. Then, because there was nothing else to do, she lifted her head and looked at the man who had become her responsibility. "I don't want you here," she said quietly. "And you don't want to be here, but here we are, courtesy of the devil himself." The Apache's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those burning eyes. Sarah couldn't tell if it was surprise at being addressed directly or simply another layer of contempt. She stood up, wiping her dusty hands on her worn dress. "I suppose you'll need water, and I'll need to figure out how to move you inside before the sun gets too high. Lord knows I don't have the strength for this, but leaving you to die of thirst wouldn't be right, no matter what you've done or what your people have done." The morning sun climbed higher, casting short shadows across the porch where a broken widow and a broken warrior regarded each other with mutual antipathy. Neither could have imagined that this moment of shared degradation would be the beginning of something that would transform not just their lives, but the very soul of sanctuary itself. But for now, there was only the dust, the heat, and the weight of Silas Cain's cruel joke pressing down upon them both like the inexorable Arizona sun. The first hour passed like a century. Sarah stood frozen on her porch, staring at the man who lay as still as death save for the steady rise and fall of his chest. and those burning eyes that tracked her every movement. The practical part of her mind, the part that had kept her alive these 3 years since Thomas died, began cataloging the impossibilities of her situation. How would she move him, feed him, clean him? The intimate nature of caring for a completely paralyzed person struck her with sudden, overwhelming force. She was expected to tend to a man, a warrior, who likely despised her very existence in ways that would be improper even with her own husband.
This is madness,
she muttered, pacing the length of the porch. The Apache's eyes followed her, unblinking. Kane's turned me into a spectacle. The grieving widow and her pet savage. That's what they'll call us? The sun climbed higher, and she could see sweat beginning to bead on the man's forehead. Whatever her feelings, she couldn't leave him to bake in the heat. But how could she possibly move him? Thomas had been a small man, and she'd struggled to help him to bed during his final illness. This Apache was built like a warrior, all lean muscle and solid bone. Sarah went inside and returned with a pitcher of water and a tin cup. She knelt beside the travois, acutely aware of how this would look to anyone passing by. The man's eyes narrowed as she approached, his jaw clenching. "You need water," she said firmly. "I'm not going to let you die of thirst just to spite Silas Kane, though Lord knows that would serve him right." She reached toward his head, intending to lift it slightly so he could drink, but the moment her fingers touched his hair, he made a sound, not quite a word, but unmistakably a rejection. The only movement he could manage was a slight turn of his head, but he used it to avoid her touch. "Fine," Sarah snapped, her fragile composure cracking. "Die of thirst then. See if I care." She stood abruptly, water sloshing from the pitcher onto the dusty boards. The rational part of her knew this was exactly what Kane wanted for her to fail, to prove she was too weak, too useless to handle even this mockery of help. But knowing that didn't make it easier. From down the road came the sound of horses. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized Mrs. Morrison's carriage, Jake Morrison's wife, a woman who collected gossip like some collected flowers. The carriage slowed as it passed, and Sarah could see faces pressed against the window. Mrs. Morrison, her daughter Elizabeth, and God help her Reverend Tobias's wife. They didn't stop, but Sarah knew that within the hour. Every soul in sanctuary would know about the Apache on her porch. The story would grow with each telling until she became either a saint or a madwoman, depending on who was doing the telling. The Apache had seen them too. Something shifted in his expression. Was it satisfaction? Did he enjoy being the instrument of her humiliation? "You think this is funny?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. "You think I want you here, that I have any choice in this matter?" His eyes remained fixed on her, dark and implacable. "I buried my husband 3 years ago," she continued, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "Buried him and inherited nothing but debt and scorn. I've sold everything of value, worn my fingers to the bone trying to work land that won't yield, endured the pity and contempt of people who once called themselves our friends. And now Kane delivers you to my door like a final insult, and I'm supposed to smile and thank him for the opportunity." She was crying now, hot tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. The Apache watched without expression, though something flickered behind his eyes' surprise, perhaps that she would show such emotion to an enemy. "I can't do this," Sarah said, sinking down onto the porch steps. "I can't even keep myself alive. How am I supposed to care for you?" The silence stretched between them, broken only by the buzz of flies and the distant sound of life continuing in sanctuary without them. Finally, Sarah wiped her eyes with the hem of her apron and stood. "But I won't give Kane the satisfaction," she said quietly, "and I won't have your death on my conscience, enemy or not." She went back inside and began gathering supplies, old blankets, a worn pillow, the last of her husband's clothes that she'd been saving to sell. If she couldn't move him, she'd have to make him comfortable where he lay. When she returned, she found him watching the sky, his expression different, softer, somehow, though his jaw remained set in defiance. "I'm going to make you a proper bed," she announced. "And then we'll figure out the rest. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like me. But if we're both trapped in this devil's bargain, we might as well survive it." She worked around him, trying to lift the edges of the travois to slide blankets underneath. It was awkward, difficult work, and more than once she had to stop to catch her breath. The Apache endured her ministrations with closed eyes, though she could see the tension in his jaw every time she had to touch him. As she worked, wagon wheels creaked past on the road. She didn't look up, but she could feel the eyes upon them, the good people of Sanctuary coming to gawk at Kane's latest entertainment. By the time she'd fashioned something resembling a proper bed, the sun was at its zenith. Sweat soaked through her dress, and her hands shook from exertion. The Apache's condition was worse. His breathing had become labored, and despite his attempts to hide it, she could see he was in pain. "The sun's too strong," she said. "I need to get you inside, but I can't lift you alone." His eyes flew open, and the look he gave her was pure venom. The message was clear: he'd rather die than accept more help from her. "Pride," Sarah said bitterly. "It's going to kill us both." She stood, looking down at him, then at the door to her home. 10 feet might as well have been 10 miles, but as she stood there, calculating impossibilities, she heard footsteps on the road. Old Samuel, the town's elderly blacksmith, had stopped at her gate. Unlike the others, he didn't pretend to be just passing by. "Mrs. Hestwood," he called, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Heard you might need some help." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse accepting help would be admitting she couldn't handle this alone, but the Apache's labored breathing made the decision for her. "Yes," she called back. "Yes, please." Samuel entered the yard, his face carefully neutral as he took in the scene. He'd lived in Sanctuary for 40 years, had seen every cruelty men could devise. This was just another in a long line. "Where do you want him?" was all he asked. "Inside, the front room, I suppose." Together, they lifted the travois, Samuel taking most of the weight. The Apache's face contorted, whether in pain or shame. Sarah couldn't tell. They maneuvered through the narrow door and into the relative cool of the house. Sarah's front room was sparse, a few pieces of furniture she hadn't yet sold. Her husband's books, a daguerreotype of her parents on the mantel. They set the travois down near the window, where at least he'd have something to look at besides the ceiling. "Thank you," Sarah said as Samuel straightened, his old bones creaking. He nodded, then looked down at the Apache with something like pity. "Kane's outdone himself this time," he said quietly. "This ain't right." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not." Samuel left without another word, and Sarah was alone again with her unwanted charge. She stood in her own front room, suddenly feeling like a stranger in her own home. The Apache's presence changed everything. The very air felt different, charged with an energy that was equal parts hostility and something else she couldn't name. "Well," she said finally, "here we are. 2 people who want nothing to do with each other, trapped by a cruel man's joke. I suppose we'll have to make the best of it." The Apache's eyes found hers, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something besides hatred there. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition that they were both victims of the same tormentor. But the moment passed, and the mask of implacable resistance returned. Sarah sighed and went to prepare what would be the first of countless meals she would have to help him eat, each one a reminder of their mutual degradation and the long, uncertain road that lay ahead. The first week was a war of silence. Sarah moved through her duties with mechanical precision, preparing broth that he refused with sealed lips, attempting to adjust his position only to be met with that burning glare, speaking to him in a steady monologue that bounced off his hostility like rain off stone. "My husband Thomas used to say that silence was its own kind of violence," she told him one morning while checking the makeshift bedding for sores. The Apache's eyes tracked her movements with the intensity of a hawk. I'm beginning to understand what he meant. She'd developed a routine born of necessity. Rise before dawn to avoid the prying eyes of neighbors. Prepare a thin gruel that might be accepted if she was patient enough. Check his body for bed sores or signs of infection, all while maintaining what dignity she could for both of them. He fought her every step of the way, using the only weapons left to him, his eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw, the occasional guttural sound that clearly meant no. By the 8th day, Sarah's patience had worn as thin as her last bar of lye soap. She knelt beside him with the morning's broth, already knowing what would happen. "You're going to die," she said bluntly. "Is that what you want, to give Silas Kane the satisfaction of saying his gift killed itself out of spite?" Something flickered in those dark eyes, the first crack in his armor of hatred. "Because that's what he expects," she continued. "He's probably taking bets at the saloon right now. How long before the Apache dies? How long before the widow goes mad? We're entertainment to them." She set the bowl down harder than necessary, broth sloshing over the rim. "You think I don't know what this is? You think I'm too stupid to understand? We're a joke, the failed woman and the broken warrior, two useless creatures thrown together for the town's amusement." His breathing had changed, become shallower. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, pride against survival, hatred against the humiliation of needing her help. "My husband," Sarah said quietly, "was kicked by a horse. Took him 3 months to die. 3 months of watching the strongest man I knew reduced to—" She gestured at the room. At him, at the whole impossible situation. He begged me to let him die with dignity. But I was selfish. I kept him alive because I couldn't bear to be alone. She picked up the bowl again, her hands surprisingly steady. "I won't make that mistake with you. You want to die, fine, but you'll do it knowing that you're giving them exactly what they want. Your death will be their victory." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then, almost imperceptibly, his lips parted. Sarah's hand trembled as she brought the spoon to his mouth. He took the broth slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, each swallow a small surrender. When the bowl was half empty, he turned his head away, done for now, but it was a start. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. The days that followed brought tiny victories and massive setbacks. He would accept food, but only when the curtains were drawn and she'd assured him no one could see. He allowed her to tend to his physical needs, but the shame in his eyes during those moments was almost unbearable to witness. She learned to talk during those times, endless chatter about nothing to fill the horrible intimacy of the necessary tasks. "The Morrisons have a new dog," she'd say while changing his bedding. "Ugly thing, all teeth and mange. Bit the postman yesterday. Serves him right, he's been reading people's mail for years." Sometimes, she thought she caught the ghost of amusement in his expression, gone too quickly to be certain. The town's reaction was everything Kane had hoped for. Sarah became a walking spectacle. Women clutched their children closer when she passed. Men made crude jokes just loud enough for her to hear. The general store began running out of supplies just as she arrived. Even the church, that supposed bastion of Christian charity, grew cold, Reverend Tobias suggested, delicately, that perhaps she might worship at home until the situation resolved itself. "Resolved itself," Sarah repeated to the Apache that evening, laughing bitterly. "I suppose that means until you die and I lose my land. Then everything will be resolved very neatly." He watched her from his pallet by the window, and she could have sworn his expression had softened fractionally. Or perhaps she was simply going mad, imagining humanity where none existed. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday. Sarah had ventured into town for supplies, enduring the whispers and stares with her chin high. But when she reached the general store, she found a crowd gathered outside. Silas Kane stood at the center, holding court. "Told her it was Christian charity," he was saying, to general laughter. "But I'll be honest, gentlemen, I just wanted to see how long it would take. My money's on another week before she cracks. Either she'll put him out of his misery or run screaming into the desert. What if she actually manages to keep him alive? someone asked. Kane's smile was cold as winter iron. Then we'll all have learned something about the lengths a desperate woman will go to, won't we? Sarah stood frozen, her marketing basket trembling in her grip. They hadn't noticed her yet, too caught up in their sport. She could slip away, pretend she hadn't heard. But something inside her, some last reserve of dignity, or perhaps just pure rage, refused to let her retreat. "Mr. Kane," she called out, her voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. The crowd turned, and she saw various expressions flit across their faces: embarrassment, amusement, anticipation. Kane himself looked delighted. "Mrs. Hestwood, we were just discussing your house guest. How is the poor creature?" "Alive," Sarah said simply. "No thanks to you." Now. Kane waggled a finger at her. "I gave you help for your farm. It's not my fault if the help is a bit limited. You gave me a dying man as a joke." The words came out flat, emotionless. "You turned two human beings into a sideshow for your entertainment." Kane's smile widened. "Human beings, I gave you a savage who'd have killed you without blinking if he could move. You're lucky he's harmless now." "Harmless," Sarah repeated. "Yes, I suppose that's what we both are now. Harmless, broken, perfect entertainment for bored men with too much money and too little conscience." She turned to go, but Kane's voice stopped her. "Careful, Mrs. Hestwood. You're already on thin ice. Wouldn't want to say something you'd regret." Sarah looked back at him, at all of them. These men who'd reduced her to this. What more could you possibly take from me? "Mr. Kane, my dignity, my standing, my hope, you've already taken those. All I have left is a dying man and a failing farm. So please, tell me what else is there to regret." She left them standing there, walking through the crowd that parted before her like she carried plague. Her hands shook as she gathered the few supplies she could afford, ignoring the store clerk's smirk. The walk home seemed endless, each step heavier than the last. When she entered her house, the Apache's eyes immediately found hers. He'd heard her come in, he always did, tracking her movements with an alertness that spoke of a warrior's instincts trapped in a useless body. "They're taking bets," she told him, setting down her meager purchases. "On which of us breaks first?" She slumped into the chair beside his pallet, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I'm so tired of being strong, tired of pretending this is bearable, tired of—" She trailed off, realizing she was crying. The tears came silently, rolling down her cheeks as she stared at her empty hands. When she finally looked up, the Apache was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not pity, he had too much pride for that, but something like recognition. "You understand, don't you?" she whispered. "What it's like to be reduced to nothing, to be entertainment for lesser men who could never survive what we've survived." He blinked slowly, deliberately. Once, twice. It wasn't much, but it was the first time he'd offered any response beyond resistance. Sarah wiped her eyes and straightened in her chair. "Well then, if we're going to be a sideshow, we might as well give them something they don't expect. They want us broken. They want us to fail. Let's disappoint them." She reached for the water pitcher, her movement steady again. "I don't know your name, and you can't tell me, but you're more than the Apache or the savage. You're a man with a story, a history, a soul that Silas Kane couldn't break no matter how hard he tried." She helped him drink, and this time he didn't fight her. It was a small thing, the absence of resistance, but it felt monumental. "I'm going to keep you alive," she said quietly. "Not for them, not even for me, but because every day you survive is a day they don't win. Can you understand that?" The Apache's eyes held hers for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, he moved his head in what might have been the slightest of nods. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. Two broken people choosing survival as the ultimate act of defiance against those who would see them destroyed. And in that dim room, With the Arizona heat pressing in from all sides, it felt like the first victory either of them had tasted in a very long time. The fire started in the barn just after midnight. Sarah woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the terrified whinnying of her old mare. Buttercup, the last animal she hadn't been forced to sell. She flew from her bed, not bothering with shoes or a wrapper, racing toward the growing orange glow that lit up the night sky. The barn was already half consumed, flames licking hungrily at the dry timber. Buttercup's screams pierced the night as Sarah fumbled with the paddock gate, her fingers clumsy with panic. The mare burst free the moment the gate opened, nearly trampling Sarah in her terror. It was only then, standing in her nightgown with her hair wild and her feet bleeding from the rocky ground, that Sarah remembered the Apache was alone in the house, unable to move, unable to escape if the fire spread. She turned back to see sparks already dancing on the wind toward her roof. The barn was lost, but the house could still be saved if the fire didn't jump. But she needed water, needed help, needed fire at the Hestwood place. The cry went up from somewhere down the road. Within minutes, she could hear horses and voices. But Sarah was already running back to the house. She burst through the door to find the Apache awake, his eyes reflecting the orange glow from the window. He'd smelled the smoke, heard the chaos, and understood his helplessness in a way that showed stark on his face. "It's the barn," she gasped. "But if it spreads—" She didn't finish. They both knew what would happen if the fire reached the house. She could run. He couldn't. Men were arriving now, not to help, she realized with sick certainty, but to watch. She could hear Kane's voice rising above the others, organizing a bucket brigade with the efficiency of a man who had no intention of working too hard to save her property. "Well, boys, let's do our Christian duty," he called out, his tone making mockery of the words. "Though it seems the Lord might be solving Mrs. Hestwood's problems for her tonight." Sarah ignored him, ignored them all. She grabbed every blanket, every piece of cloth she could find, soaking them in the water barrel outside. The heat from the barn was intense, and she could see embers landing on her roof, glowing like deadly stars. "Ma'am, you should step back," Jake Morrison called out, making a half-hearted pass with a bucket. "Wouldn't want you getting hurt." "Then help me," Sarah shouted, beating at a smoldering patch on the porch roof with a wet blanket. "Don't just stand there." Some of the men had the grace to look ashamed, but it was old Samuel who stepped forward first. Then, surprisingly, Doc Pritchard. Together they formed a more effective brigade, though Sarah could see the resignation in their movements. They expected the house to burn, expected her to finally be driven off the land. For an hour they fought, Sarah working with a fury that seemed to shame even the most reluctant helpers into action. Her nightgown was soaked through with water and sweat, her hands blistered from gripping the rough blankets. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks that sent everyone scrambling, and for one terrible moment, it seemed the house would follow. Fire caught on the eastern wall, climbing with horrifying speed. That's when Sarah did something that made even Silas Kane stop talking. She ran into the house. "The woman's gone mad," someone shouted, but Sarah wasn't listening. She found the Apache watching the smoke beginning to creep under the door, his face set in the rigid mask of a warrior preparing for death. "No," she said fiercely. "Not like this. Not for their entertainment." She grabbed the water pitcher beside his pallet and doused the blanket covering him. Then, with strength born of desperation, she began dragging the entire pallet toward the door. It was impossible, she knew it was impossible, but she pulled anyway, her bare feet finding purchase on the wooden floor, every muscle straining. The Apache's eyes went wide as he understood what she was trying to do. For the first time since he'd arrived, she saw something break in his expression, the warrior's mask, cracking to reveal the man beneath. "Nita," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "Nita." She didn't know what it meant, didn't care. The smoke was getting thicker, and she could hear the fire eating through the wall. With a final, desperate heave, She got the pallet to the door, but the frame was too narrow. He would have to be lifted out. That's when hands appeared, Samuel's gnarled fingers, and, impossibly, Doc Pritchard's softer ones. Together they lifted the Apache, carried him free of the house just as the eastern wall began to buckle. They set him down a safe distance away, and Sarah collapsed beside him, coughing smoke from her lungs. She was dimly aware of men rushing past. The bucket brigade working with renewed urgency now that they'd witnessed her insane bravery. "Nita," the Apache said again, his eyes fixed on her face. "I don't understand," Sarah gasped between coughs. "Name," someone said. She looked up to see Samuel standing over them, his craggy face unreadable. "It's his name. Means warrior in Apache." Sarah looked down at the man she'd dragged from a burning building. This broken warrior who'd finally given her his name in what he'd believed were his final moments. "Nita," she repeated softly. He blinked. Once, twice. Yes. By dawn, the fire was out. The barn was gone, reduced to smoking timbers and ash. But the house stood scarred, one wall partially burned, but standing. The crowd had dispersed, leaving Sarah sitting in the dirt beside Nita, both of them covered in soot and ash. Silas Kane was the last to go. He stood looking down at them, his expression unreadable in the gray morning light. "You should have let it burn," he said finally. "Would have been easier for everyone." Sarah looked up at him, too exhausted for anger. "Easier for who, Mr. Kane?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked away. But something had changed in the night, and they all knew it. The joke had turned into something else, something that made people uncomfortable. A woman who'd run into a burning building to save an enemy wasn't amusing. She was unsettling. Sarah helped Nita drink water, their shared exhaustion creating a strange intimacy. His eyes kept finding hers, and in them she saw questions he couldn't voice. "You asked why," she said quietly. "Why I saved you." He blinked. "Yes. Because I'm tired of losing things. My husband, my home, my dignity. I've lost them all. But I won't lose you. Not to fire, not to Kane, not to this cruel joke of a situation we're trapped in." She managed a weak smile. "Besides, you finally told me your name. It would have been rude to let you burn after that." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his dark eyes. Doc Pritchard returned as the sun rose fully, bringing his medical bag. He examined them both with surprising gentleness, treating Sarah's burns and checking Nita for smoke damage. "That was a damn fool thing you did," he said to Sarah as he wrapped her blistered hands. "Brave, but foolish. Seems to be my specialty." Sarah replied. Doc paused in his work, glancing between Sarah and Nita. "Sam was right. About his name, I spent time at Fort Grant, picked up some Apache. He called you something else too, when you were pulling him out. Ixehe means woman of iron." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from exhaustion or emotion, she couldn't say. She looked at Nita, who was watching her with that steady gaze that no longer held only hatred. "We make quite a pair, don't we?" she said softly. "The warrior and the woman of iron, both broken, both stubborn as mules." Nita's lips moved carefully, forming unfamiliar sounds. S-ah-ra. It was her name, mangled by unused vocal cords and a tongue that spoke a different language. But it was her name. Sarah felt her tears spill over then, cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Sarah, and you're Nita. We know each other now? Really know each other?" Doc Pritchard finished his work and stood, looking uncomfortable with the emotion of the scene. "I'll send someone to help clear the barn debris," he muttered. "And maybe some of the men can help repair that wall." It was a small offer, but it was the first crack in the town's unified cruelty. Sarah nodded her thanks, too tired to speak. As the morning wore on, Sarah and Nita sat in companionable silence, watching the smoke rise from the ruins of the barn. Everything had changed in the night. She'd saved his life, and in doing so, had somehow saved something in herself, some spark of defiance that Kane and the town hadn't managed to extinguish. "We survived," she said finally. "Their joke, the fire, all of it. We survived." Nita made a sound that might have been agreement. His eyes were closed now, exhausted by the night's ordeal, but his expression was peaceful. The warrior's mask had not returned. In its place was something Sarah was only beginning to understand: trust. Perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. The sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the damage. There was so much work to do, so many impossibilities to face. But for the first time since Silas Kane had dumped this broken warrior on her doorstep, Sarah felt something besides despair. She felt hope. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after the fire, on a day when the desert wind carried the scent of distant rain. Sarah had positioned Nita's pallet on the porch as she did each morning, letting him watch the world while she worked the stubborn soil of her garden patch. The plants were dying, had been dying for months, but she kept at it with the dogged persistence of someone who'd forgotten how to quit. "Nothing grows here," she muttered, stabbing at the hard-packed earth with her hoe. "Thomas always said I was trying to force life from a corpse." Nita made a sound, not quite a word, but deliberate. Sarah had learned to distinguish between his involuntary noises and his attempts at communication. She looked up to find him staring intently at her failed garden, then shifting his gaze to a spot near the fence line. "What?" She followed his gaze but saw nothing special, just more dusty ground and scraggly sage. He vocalized again, frustration evident in the sound. His eyes moved deliberately: garden, fence line, garden, fence line. "You're trying to tell me something." Sarah set down her hoe and approached his pallet. "About the garden?" 2 blinks. Yes. She'd developed this system with him over the weeks: 1 blink for no, 2 for yes. It was primitive but functional. Now she knelt beside him, trying to understand. "Something about where I'm planting." 2 blinks. "Should I plant over there instead?" She pointed toward the fence line. 2 blinks, emphatic. Sarah frowned. "But it's the same soil." She stopped, really looking at the spot for the first time. The sage there was greener, fuller than the surrounding brush. A slight depression in the ground, barely visible, ran along that area. "Water," she breathed. "There's water running underground there. That's what you're trying to tell me." The relief in Nita's eyes was unmistakable. 2 blinks. Over the following days, this became their pattern. Nita would observe something: the movement of clouds, the behavior of insects, the color of distant mountains, and through their crude system of blinks and gestures, he would convey knowledge that Sarah had never possessed: where to dig for water, when rain would come, which plants were edible, which poisonous. "You're teaching me," she said one evening, amazed. "All this time I thought I was taking care of you, but you're teaching me how to survive on this land." His response was a look that seemed to say, asterisk, "We teach each other." Their communication evolved rapidly after that. Sarah brought out paper and charcoal, rigging a board that Nita could see while she drew. He would guide her with eye movements: look left for no, right for yes, up to continue, down to start over. Together they created crude maps of water sources, diagrams of planting patterns, pictures of edible plants. The first successful well came 2 weeks later. Sarah had hired old Samuel's grandson, Pete, to dig where Nita had indicated. The boy was skeptical until his shovel hit damp earth at 6 feet. "I'll be damned," Pete muttered, then quickly apologized for his language. "Sorry, Mrs. Hestwood, but there's water here, sure enough." Word spread quickly. The widow Hestwood had found water in the dry season. Some called it luck. Others whispered about Apache magic, crossing themselves as they passed her property. But just a few began to wonder if there was more to the paralyzed warrior than they'd assumed. Sarah used the water sparingly, following Nita's guidance on irrigation. Within a month, green shoots appeared in her garden. Nothing fancy beans, squash, hardy vegetables that could survive the desert heat, but they grew. The first successful harvest was small, barely enough for a meal, but Sarah prepared it with the reverence usually reserved for feast days. "We did this," she told Nita, serving him the soup made from their vegetables. "Together." He swallowed carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with great effort, he spoke, "To-geth-er." Sarah nearly dropped the spoon. It was the clearest word he'd managed since saying her name. "Yes," she whispered. "Together." Their success didn't go unnoticed. Silas Kane appeared one morning as Sarah was working the expanded garden, his presence casting a shadow over the new growth. "Quite the miracle you've managed here, Mrs. Hestwood." His tone suggested he found the miracle suspect. "No miracle," Sarah replied, not stopping her work. "Just knowledge and hard work." "Knowledge." Kane glanced toward the house where Nita lay on the porch. "And where did you acquire this sudden knowledge of desert farming?" Sarah straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "Does it matter the land is producing? That should please you, Mr. Kane. A productive property is more valuable than a barren one." "That depends," Kane said slowly. "On who's doing the producing. Some folks are saying you're consorting with heathen magic. That's a dangerous reputation for a Christian woman." "Some folks should mind their own business." Kane's face hardened. "Everything in this town is my business, Mrs. Hestwood, including you. Don't forget that." He left with that threat hanging in the air, but Sarah found she wasn't as frightened as she once would have been. She had water now, food, and most importantly, she had an ally broken in body but sharp in mind, teaching her the secrets of survival that no white settler had bothered to learn. The transformation accelerated. Nita guided her in building simple but effective irrigation channels, in reading weather patterns, in knowing which wild plants could supplement their diet. Sarah became his hands. He became her knowledge, and together they achieved what neither could have managed alone. Neighbors began to take notice. Martha Brennan, whose own garden struggled, swallowed her pride and approached Sarah one day. "I heard, that is, people are saying you've had success with your crops," Martha said stiffly. She'd been one of the women who'd shunned Sarah most thoroughly. "Yes," Sarah replied simply. Martha fidgeted with her bonnet strings. "I wondered, that is, my children. The youngest has been poorly, and fresh vegetables would help." Sarah could have been petty, could have reminded Martha of all the times she'd crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. Instead, she glanced at Nita, who was watching from the porch. He blinked twice. "Yes." "Come back tomorrow," Sarah said. "Bring paper and something to write with. There are things you need to know about water and soil." Martha's eyes widened. "You'd teach me." "We would teach you," Sarah corrected, nodding toward Nita. "Both of us." The look of conflict on Martha's face was almost comical desperation warring with prejudice. Desperation won. "Thank you," she whispered, and fled. She returned the next day, and the day after. Soon, others followed. Not many, and not without reservation, but enough. They came seeking knowledge and found themselves confronting their assumptions about the broken Apache who couldn't move but could read the land like scripture. "He knows things," Martha told her husband one evening, unaware that Sarah could hear through the open window. "Things about rain patterns and soil that my father never learned in 40 years of farming. It's not heathen magic, it's knowledge, ancient knowledge." The garden grew, and with it, Sarah and Nita's strange partnership deepened. She would work while he observed, and in the evening she would sit beside him, sharing the day's small victories and defeats. He spoke more now, words coming slowly but with increasing clarity. "Your people," he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains red. They fight land. I teach work with land. Yes, Sarah agreed. We've been fools, trying to force this place to be something it's not. Not fools. His voice was thoughtful. Lost, cut from earth, from sky, alone. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Not alone anymore. He turned his head slightly, the most movement he could manage to look at her. No, not alone. As autumn approached, Sarah's property had transformed. What had been barren dust now showed patches of green. The new well provided steady water. The house, scarred but solid, stood as testament to their survival. And on the porch, two unlikely partners continued their daily collaboration, the widow who'd learned to read the land and the warrior who taught her, bound together by necessity, growing into something neither had expected. The town's judgment hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. Where once there had been only mockery, now there was uncertainty. Some still whispered about unseemly arrangements and heathen influence, but others, practical people who valued results over prejudice, began to see what Sarah had seen, that knowledge had no color, no tribe, no boundaries save those people created. And in his seat of power, Silas Kane watched the transformation with growing unease. His joke had backfired spectacularly. Instead of breaking the widow, he'd inadvertently given her the means to thrive. Instead of providing entertainment, he'd created something far more dangerous, a partnership that challenged every assumption about who was weak and who was strong, who was savage and who was civilized. But Sarah and Nita, focused on survival and small daily victories, didn't yet understand the magnitude of what they'd built together. They only knew that tomorrow there would be more work, more teaching, more learning, and that neither of them would face it alone. The announcement came on a crystalline October morning, delivered by Kane himself, with all the pomp of a king decreeing law. He stood in the center of town, his voice carrying across the square where the weekly market had drawn most of Sanctuary's population. Ladies and gentlemen, I have an exciting proposition. Kane's smile was sharp as a blade. As you know, the territorial government has been encouraging development of our region's resources. To that end, I'm sponsoring a competition, a land race, if you will. Sarah, who'd come to trade vegetables for cloth, felt her stomach tighten. Nothing good ever came from Kane's propositions. The rules are simple, Kane continued. A 50-mile race across the desert, from here to Devil's Canyon and back. The winner receives full title to the old Barranca Valley tract, 200 acres of prime land with year-round water rights. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Barranca Valley was legendary fertile soil, natural springs, everything a farmer could dream of. Kane had held it for years, letting it lie fallow while others scraped by on dust and hope. But here's the interesting part. Kane's eyes found Sarah in the crowd. Any landowner in the territory can enter, man or woman. The race will be in 2 weeks' time. Sarah understood immediately. This wasn't a generous offer, it was a trap designed specifically for her. Kane had seen her small successes and decided to end them. He knew she couldn't resist the chance at real land, just as he knew she couldn't possibly win against younger, stronger riders. "What's the entry fee?" someone called out. "Your current property deed," Kane replied smoothly. "Winner takes the Barranca Valley. Losers, well, they'll have the satisfaction of having tried." The crowd erupted in discussion. For most, the risk was too great, but for someone like Sarah, barely holding on to worthless land, the temptation would be overwhelming. She left without trading her vegetables, her mind racing. When she told Nita about the competition, his reaction was immediate and negative. "No," he said firmly. His speech had improved markedly over the months. "Trap, Kane, wants you to lose." "I know," Sarah paced the porch. "But Nita, think about it. The Barranca Valley, with land like that, we could do more than survive. We could build something real." "We have something real." His eyes followed her agitated movements. "Here, now." "Do we—" Sarah stopped pacing. "I'm still in debt. Still one bad season from losing everything. And you're still—" She gestured helplessly at his immobile form. "Still broken," Nita finished quietly. "Yes." Sarah knelt beside him. "That's not what I meant." His truth. His dark eyes held no self-pity. "But broken does not mean useless. We have proved this." Over the following days, they debated. Sarah knew it was foolish, knew Kane would stack the race against her, but the promise of real security, of land that could truly sustain them, gnawed at her. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Doc Pritchard visited to check on Nita, and mentioned the race casually. "Shame about the route," he said while examining Nita's chest for congestion. "That old cavalry trail is murder on horses. All those switchbacks and false paths. A man could get lost for days if he didn't know the markers." After he left, Sarah found Nita deep in thought. "You know it," she said suddenly. "The trail. You know it." 2 blinks, yes. "From before when you could—" She trailed off, but he understood. "Hunted there, fought there." His voice was distant, remembering. "Every rock, every tree, every shadow." Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest. "You could guide me, tell me the shortcuts, the safe paths, the water sources." Dangerous, but she could see him considering it. "Kane will cheat, others too. Then we'll have to be smarter than them." They spent the next week in intensive preparation, using their system of maps and gestures. Nita laid out the trail in painstaking detail. Sarah memorized every landmark, every potential ambush site, every hidden spring. They developed signals, ways for her to carry his knowledge with her even when he couldn't be there. "The third canyon," Nita explained laboriously. "Looks like dead end, but high path, on north wall, saves 3 miles." Sarah sketched frantically, creating a mental map overlaid with his memories. She learned that what appeared to be the obvious route was often the longest, that the Apache had carved subtle trails invisible to cavalry eyes. 3 days before the race, an unexpected visitor arrived. Martha Brennan, accompanied by 2 other women who'd been learning from Sarah and Nita. "We heard about the race," Martha said without preamble. "It's not right, what Kane's doing." "It's my choice," Sarah replied. "Maybe, but if you're going to do this fool thing, you'll do it properly." Martha produced a wrapped bundle. "My husband's riding clothes. They'll fit better than a dress for hard riding." The other women had brought supplies, trail food, a better canteen, liniment for the horse, small gifts. But the gesture nearly undid Sarah's composure. "Why?" she asked. Martha glanced at Nita, then back to Sarah. "Because you taught us when you didn't have to. Because some of us are tired of Kane deciding who succeeds and who fails. And because—" She paused. "Because maybe it's time someone showed that strength isn't always about muscle and bluster." The night before the race, Sarah sat with Nita under the stars. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. "Afraid?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But not of losing, of letting you down, of wasting everything we've built. Cannot waste what we have learned, cannot lose what we have become." He paused, gathering strength for more words. "You say I teach you, but you teach too. Teach that broken people can choose, can fight, can matter." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "Nita, tomorrow, you ride with my eyes, my knowledge, but also your courage, your iron will." His lips curved in what had become his version of a smile. "Show them what we are together." The morning of the race dawned clear and cold. Sarah dressed in Martha's borrowed clothes, feeling strange in trousers but grateful for the freedom of movement. She saddled Buttercup, the old mare nervous but game. The starting line was crowded. 15 riders had entered, most of them young men eager for glory and land. Kane sat on a raised platform like an emperor overseeing games. His smile when he saw Sarah was predatory. "Well, Mrs. Hestwood, how nice of you to join us. I hope you said proper goodbyes to your house guest." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "We said what needed saying." "Good, because win or lose, things are about to change significantly." He raised his voice. "Riders, the rules are simple. First one to Devil's Canyon and back wins. The trail is marked with red flags. Anyone caught taking shortcuts will be disqualified." Sarah almost smiled. The marked trail was the longest possible route, winding through the worst terrain. But Nita had shown her paths that weren't shortcuts. They were the original trails, older than any flags. "Riders ready." Sarah gripped her reins, feeling the weight of the sketch map in her pocket, the knowledge in her mind, the hope of two broken people who'd found strength in each other. "Begin." The gun fired. Horses leaped forward. And Sarah Hestwood, guided by the eyes and wisdom of a paralyzed Apache warrior, rode toward a destiny that neither Silas Kane nor the town of Sanctuary could have imagined. The race that would become legend had begun. The first 5 miles were chaos. 15 riders jostling for position, dust clouds obscuring vision, horses screaming their competitive fury. Sarah held Buttercup back, letting the young bucks exhaust themselves in their initial frenzy. She could hear their mockery as they passed the widow on her ancient mare. What a joke. Let them laugh. Nita had taught her that the desert killed the arrogant first. At the fork near Skeleton Ridge, the red flags led left into a boulder field that would slow horses to a careful walk. Sarah pulled right instead, following a barely visible deer track that Nita had described. "Look for the rock shaped like Eagle's head," he'd said. "Path starts there." The track was narrow, treacherous, but passable, while the others picked their way through rocks. Sarah gained a 1/4 mile. Not much, but in a race of 50 miles, every advantage counted. By the 10-mile mark, the field had spread out. Sarah caught glimpses of riders ahead and behind, everyone following the flag-marked trail like obedient sheep. Everyone except her and, she noticed with alarm, Jake Morrison. Kane's man had also left the marked trail, though he'd chosen a different alternative route. The sun climbed higher, brutal in its intensity. Sarah rationed her water carefully, remembering Nita's lessons. Desert racing not about speed, he'd explained. About lasting. Horse that drinks too much, too fast, dies. Rider who pushes too hard, fails. At Coyote Wash, she encountered the first trap. Fresh horse tracks led into what appeared to be a shortcut through the canyon, but Nita had warned her about this specifically. False trail, ends in Box Canyon. Cavalry trick Apache learned hard way. Sarah skirted the wash, taking the longer but certain path. 20 minutes later, she heard furious shouting echoing from the canyon. Someone had taken the bait. The real test came at the Devil's Backbone, a razor-thin ridge trail with drops on both sides. The marked route went around, adding 3 miles. The ridge path saved distance, but required nerve and a sure-footed horse. Sarah dismounted, leading Buttercup carefully. The mare, used to Sarah's gentle handling, followed trustingly. Halfway across, rocks clattered behind her. Jake Morrison had found the ridge trail too, but he stayed mounted, urging his stallion forward recklessly. "Giving up already, widow," he called. "Smart choice. This ain't no place for women." Sarah didn't respond, focusing on each careful step. Morrison's horse, sensing its rider's impatience and the danger, began to balk. She heard Morrison curse, spurring harder. It happened fast. The stallion, panicked by rough handling and the precipitous drops, reared. Morrison, caught off guard, lost his seat. For one terrible moment, horse and rider teetered on the edge. Then Morrison managed to throw himself forward, landing hard on the trail while his horse scrambled back to safety. Sarah could have left him. Should have, by the ruthless logic of racing. Instead, she remembered Nita's words. Strength not always in winning. sometimes in choosing who we remain. "You hurt," she called back. Morrison glared at her, pride warring with pain. His ankle was already swelling. "Get on with your race, woman. Can you ride? What do you care?" But she could see the fear beneath his bravado. A lame rider in the desert was in serious danger. Sarah made a decision that would have seemed insane weeks ago. She pulled out her precious water, tossing him the canteen. "There's a spring 2 miles north, marked by 3 dead junipers. Get there, rest, then head back slow. Race ain't worth dying for." Morrison caught the canteen, confusion replacing hostility. "Why?" "Because I'm not Silas Kane," Sarah said simply. She remounted Buttercup and continued across the ridge, leaving Morrison to make his own choices. The kindness nearly cost her everything. By the time she reached Devil's Canyon, the race's turning point, 3 riders had passed her. Young Tom Garrett, the favorite, was already heading back, his fresh horse eating up ground. 2 others followed close behind. Sarah's heart sank. She was too far behind. All the shortcuts in the world couldn't make up for Buttercup's age and her own inexperience. But then she remembered Nita's final piece of advice. "When Apache cannot match enemy strength, we change the battle, make them fight our fight." The return route was where Nita's knowledge truly shone, while others retraced their steps along the marked trail. Sarah took paths that existed in no white man's map. A slot canyon that looked impassable but opened into a hidden valley. An underground stream bed that cut miles off the journey. Ancient petroglyphs that marked water sources unknown to cavalry or settlers. She began passing exhausted riders. Their younger, faster horses had spent themselves in the desert heat, while Buttercup paced carefully and watered wisely, maintained her steady rhythm. The tortoise and hare, Sarah thought, though she doubted Aesop had ever imagined his fable playing out in the Arizona Badlands. With 10 miles to go, Sarah had moved into second place. Only Tom Garrett remained ahead, his horse beginning to show signs of distress but still game. Sarah could see him occasionally, a dust cloud in the distance that seemed impossibly far ahead. Then she saw the smoke. Black columns rising from the direction of Sanctuary. For one horrible moment, Sarah thought it was her home, that Kane had used the race as cover for final destruction. But the smoke was further east, the direction of the town itself. Other riders saw it too. Some slowed, confused. Others pushed harder, worried about property and family. Sarah fought the urge to abandon the race, to rush back and check on Nita. But she could hear his voice in her mind. "Trust, I survive worse than being alone." The final approach to Sanctuary brought the cruelest challenge. Kane had stationed men along the last miles not to cheat. Exactly. But to cheer in ways calculated to spook horses and rattle riders. They whooped and fired guns in the air as Sarah passed, waved blankets at Buttercup, created as much chaos as possible without technically breaking rules. But Buttercup, steady old Buttercup, had survived wolves and fires and storm. Mere noise couldn't shake her, especially with Sarah's calm hands on the reins. Tom Garrett's younger mount wasn't as seasoned, already stressed from the hard pace. The stallion shied violently at the gunfire. Garrett, excellent rider though he was, had to fight for control, losing precious seconds. Sarah passed him with 2 miles to go. The final stretch was a blur of dust and determination. Sarah could hear Garrett coming, his horse finding a final reserve of speed. The town came into view, crowds lining the main street. She could see the finish line, a rope stretched between 2 posts in front of Kane's hotel. 1 mile. Garrett was gaining, his youth and skill beginning to tell. Buttercup gave everything she had, but it might not be enough. 1/2 mile. Sarah could see individual faces in the crowd. Martha Brennan, Doc Pritchard, old Samuel. And there, propped in a chair someone had brought from her house, was Nita. Someone, probably Samuel, had carried him to town to watch. Their eyes met across the distance. and Sarah felt a surge of strength that had nothing to do with physical power. She leaned forward, whispering Apache words Nita had taught her, words of encouragement, of partnership, of iron will. Buttercup responded with heart that exceeded her aging body. The old mare stretched out, finding speed Sarah didn't know she possessed. Garrett's stallion came alongside, the two horses matching stride for stride. 100 yards, 50, 20. They hit the finish line together, so close that no one could initially say who'd won. The crowd exploded in confusion and argument, but Sarah's eyes were only for Nita, whose rare smile told her everything she needed to know. She'd done it. Not alone, never alone anymore, but together with the broken warrior who'd taught her to see with different eyes. Silas Kane stood on his platform, face purple with rage as his judges huddled in conference. The smoke still rose in the east later. Sarah would learn a feed store had caught fire. Purely coincidental, but adding drama to an already legendary day. Finally, old Judge Carter, brought in from Tucson for fairness, raised his hand. By a nose, and I mean that literally, Mrs. Sarah Hestwood is declared the winner. The crowd's roar was deafening. Some cheered, some protested, but none could deny what they'd witnessed. The broken widow and her ancient mare, guided by the wisdom of a paralyzed Apache, had beaten the strongest riders in the territory. Sarah slid from Buttercup's back, legs shaking, and made her way through the crowd to where Nita waited. She knelt beside his chair, not caring who watched.
We did it,
she whispered. You did it, he corrected, his voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. I only showed. You rode. You chose. You won. We won, Sarah insisted. Together. As Kane was forced to hand over the deed to Barranca Valley, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Sarah felt the weight of change settling over them all. This wasn't just about land or races. It was about assumptions overturned, about strength redefined, about two broken people who'd found wholeness in partnership. The real victory, she realized, wasn't the valley, precious though that was. It was the look in Nita's eyes, proud and fierce and alive. It was the grudging respect on faces that had shown only contempt. It was the knowledge that together, they'd proven everyone wrong, including themselves. The race was over. The real journey was just beginning. The moment of triumph was brief. As Judge Carter handed Sarah the deed to Barranca Valley, Silas Kane stepped forward, his composure restored but his eyes cold as winter steel. Congratulations, Mrs. Hestwood, he said, loud enough for all to hear. Of course, there's still the small matter of your existing debts. The mortgage on your current property remains. And as I recall, you put that property up as your race entry. Sarah's blood ran cold. In her focus on winning, she'd forgotten this crucial detail. She'd won the valley but lost her home, the home where Nita waited, where they'd built their partnership. However, Kane continued, savoring each word, I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you 30 days to vacate. After all, you'll need time to move your belongings to your new property. The crowd murmured uneasily. This wasn't the clean victory they'd witnessed. This was Kane being Kane, turning triumph into ash. 30 days, Sarah repeated numbly. Unless, of course, you'd like to make a deal. Kane's smile was serpentine. The Barranca Valley for your debts, cleared completely. You keep your current home, and we forget this whole unfortunate race business. Give up the prize she'd nearly killed herself to win. Return to scraping by on marginal land. Let Kane win after all. Sarah looked at Nita, still propped in his chair. His face was unreadable, but she saw his hand twitch, the tiny movement he used to signal, wait. I need time to consider, Sarah said. 24 hours, Kane replied. After that, my generous offer expires. The crowd dispersed slowly. The celebratory mood soured. Several people helped carry Nita back to Sarah's house, their movements gentle with newfound respect. Sarah walked beside him, leading an exhausted Buttercup. her mind racing. Once home, with Nita settled on his pallet and the helpful neighbors gone, Sarah gave in to despair. "We won nothing," she said bitterly. "He outmaneuvered us again." "No," Nita said firmly. "He shows fear. Desperate moves mean desperate man. Desperate, he holds all the cards." "Does he?" Nita's eyes glinted. "Tell me again. What the judge said. Exact words." Sarah frowned, thinking back. "He declared me the winner, said I'd won by a nose. And then he... Wait." Sarah's eyes widened. "He never said anything about the other riders, never declared them losers, just said I won." "The race had one winner," Nita said slowly, "but rules said losers forfeit land if race not finished properly." Understanding dawned. If the race wasn't properly concluded for all riders, then the forfeitures might not be legal. Kane was so focused on me losing. He didn't ensure his own rules were airtight. "Need lawyer," Nita said. "Good one. From outside sanctuary." Sarah's hope dimmed. "With what money?" A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah opened it to find Tom Garrett, the young rider she'd barely beaten. He held his hat awkwardly, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hestwood, I wanted to... That is..." He struggled for words. "What you did out there, giving Morrison water, even though it cost you, that was... well, it was something. It was what anyone should do," Sarah said quietly. "No, ma'am, it wasn't." Tom twisted his hat brim. "My pa's a lawyer up in Prescott. A good one. He doesn't much like Kane had some dealings that left a bad taste. If you need legal help." Sarah felt tears threaten. "I can't pay..." "Didn't ask you to." Tom's young face was earnest. "Pa always said the law should be about justice, not just money. Besides..." He grinned suddenly. "I'd like to see Kane's face when real legal papers start flying." Within 2 days, Tom's father, James Garrett Sr., arrived from Prescott, a tall, scholarly man with sharp eyes. He listened to the whole story with increasing interest. "Fascinating," he murmured, reviewing the race documents. "Kane was so confident of winning. He drafted sloppy rules. Look here, losers forfeit their entry stake. But he never properly defined what constitutes a loser. Is it everyone who didn't win those who didn't finish? Those who finished last?" He leaned back, smiling like a cat with cream. "Moreover, several riders never actually finished the race at all. They withdrew due to injury or equipment failure. Are they losers? If they never completed the course, the language is fatally vague." "So what does that mean?" Sarah asked. "It means, Mrs. Hestwood, that Mr. Kane is about to discover the difference between small-town bullying and actual law. The legal battle that followed became the stuff of territorial legend. Garrett Sr. filed injunctions, depositions, and challenges that tied Kane's threats in knots. He argued that the race rules were unconscionably vague, that the forfeiture clause was legally unenforceable, and that Sarah's victory stood independent of any other considerations. Kane hired his own lawyers, of course, but they were cronies used to intimidating farmers, not matching wits with a Prescott legal scholar who'd argued cases before the territorial Supreme Court. The turning point came when Judge Carter, brought back to arbitrate, reviewed the original race documents. Mr. Kane," he said wearily, "you drafted rules that a first-year law student would laugh at. The forfeiture clause is so poorly written as to be meaningless. Mrs. Hestwood won the race and the prize. Period. As for the other participants, without clear definition of their status, no forfeitures can be enforced." But the judge wasn't done. "Furthermore, this entire scheme smacks of predatory manipulation, using debt and desperation to force people into unfair wagers that borders on usury and fraud. Mr. Kane, I suggest you accept Mrs. Hestwood's victory gracefully, unless you want the territorial authorities looking very closely at all your business practices." The courtroom, actually, the saloon, pressed into legal service, erupted. Kane's face cycled through several colors before settling on a mottled puce.
This isn't over,
he hissed at Sarah as he stormed out. Yes, she said quietly.
It is.
The aftermath was sweeter than the victory itself. Sarah kept her original home and gained the Barranca Valley, without the threat of forfeiture hanging over them. Other riders who'd entered Kane's trap found their courage. Jake Morrison, still limping from his ridge mishap, actually shook Sarah's hand. That water you gave me, he said gruffly, saved my life. Man thinks about things, lying in the desert sun, maybe thinks about who he's been riding for and why. One by one, Kane's supporters began distancing themselves. His stranglehold on Sanctuary, built on fear and debt, crumbled as people realized the Emperor had no clothes, just a mean spirit and sloppy legal work. But the sweetest moment came a week later, when Sarah and a crew of volunteers began preparing the Barranca Valley land. Nita was there, carried on a special litter Tom Garrett had designed, positioned where he could oversee the work. Good soil, he pronounced, after Sarah brought him handful of dark earth. Water here, here, and here. His eyes traced the valley's contours. Plant winter crops first. Spring will bring... He paused, searching for words to capture his vision. Abundance. Martha Brennan and several other women had come to help, bringing seedlings and expertise gained from their sessions with Nita. Doc Pritchard contributed medical herbs for a healing garden. Even old Samuel, joints creaking, insisted on helping dig irrigation channels. As the sun set over their first day's work, Sarah knelt beside Nita. The valley stretched before them, golden in the evening light, rich with promise.
We did it,
she said softly.
We really did it.
Beginning, Nita corrected. This is beginning. What comes next? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you teach me your words better. I teach you more of land's secrets. Together we make this valley. He paused, then used a word she didn't recognize.
What does that mean?
No English word. He thought, place where broken things grow whole, where different peoples meet and learn, where earth gives freely because we ask rightly. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks.
That's beautiful.
Is necessary, Nita said simply. World changes, must choose wall or bridge. We choose bridge. As darkness fell and the volunteers headed home, Sarah and Nita remained, watching stars appear over their valley. Tomorrow would bring hard work breaking ground, planting seeds, building new life from scratch. There would be challenges, setbacks, those who couldn't accept what they were creating together. But tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, a widow and a warrior sat in companionable silence, dreaming of bridges and abundance, of healing and hope. They had won more than a race, more than land. They had won the right to build something new, something unprecedented, a partnership that transcended every boundary their world wanted to impose. Silas Kane's cruel joke had become their greatest gift. In trying to break them, he had instead forged something unbreakable, a bond between two souls who had discovered that together. They were invincible. The old world of Sanctuary would never be the same. The new world of Barranca Valley had just begun. Spring came to Barranca Valley like a kept promise, where once had been empty land. Now green shoots pushed through dark soil. Irrigation channels carried precious water in silver threads, and the frame of a new house rose against the sky. But it was the small building near the main home that drew the most visitors, a ramada with open sides where Nita held court each morning. They came tentatively at first, these seekers of knowledge, a homesteader wondering why his wells kept running dry, a rancher whose cattle were dying of some mysterious ailment, a young couple trying to coax life from stubborn soil. They came expecting to deal with Sarah, then found themselves captivated by the quiet Apache who could read the land like scripture. Your wells fail because you dig where water wants to be, not where it is, Nita told the homesteader through Sarah's translation, though his English improved daily. Water follows old paths, deep paths. Look for the cottonwood that grows alone, its roots no secrets. To the rancher, your cattle eat loco weed in the south pasture. See how they stumble, move them north. Let that ground rest, the poison will fade. To the young couple, you plant by calendar, not by signs. Watch the mountains when snow melts from Eagle Peak. Then plant corn. When morning glory blooms, plant beans. Word spread like wildfire through the territory. The paralyzed Apache who couldn't move but could see everything. The warrior who taught peace with the land instead of conquest over it. Soon, Sarah had to establish visiting hours, as the stream of seekers threatened to overwhelm their own work. But Nita never turned away anyone truly in need, using an ingenious system of maps, sketches, and patient explanation. He dispensed knowledge accumulated over generations. Sarah served as his voice, his hands, and increasingly, his student in the deeper mysteries of desert survival. "Your people," he told her one evening as they watched the sun paint the valley golden. "They are like children who've lost their parents. They know things should grow, water should flow, but not why or how. They fight the land like an enemy." "And your way?" Sarah asked. "Not my way, the old way. Land is not enemy as teacher. Every drought, every flood, every season speaks, but must learn the language first." It was Tom Garrett who first used the word that would stick. "Coming to thank Nita for advice about horse breeding," the young man said. "It's like you're the territory's grandfather, teaching us things we should have known all along." Nita's rare smile appeared. "Grandfather, yes, all peoples need elders, even stubborn white people." The transformation of the valley accelerated, following Nita's guidance. Sarah and her growing crew of helpers created an oasis. They planted according to ancient patterns that maximized water retention and minimized erosion. They introduced native plants that enriched the soil instead of depleting it. They created what Nita called conversation between human need and Earth's gift. The success couldn't be ignored. Even Sanctuary, struggling under Cain's declining influence, took notice. The general store began stocking seeds Sarah recommended. Farmers quietly implemented Nita's techniques. The very landscape began to change as people learned to work with the desert instead of against it. Then came the day that changed everything. A delegation arrived from Fort Grant, not soldiers, but agricultural inspectors sent by the territorial government. They'd heard rumors of miraculous harvests, of desert land producing like river valleys. They came skeptical and left amazed. Mrs. Hestwood, the lead inspector, a doorman named Collins, said after touring the property, "This is extraordinary. Your yields are triple what we see elsewhere in the territory. Your water usage is half. How?" Sarah gestured to where Nita sat in his customary spot under the ramada. "Ask him." Collins hesitated. The idea of consulting an Apache, a paralyzed one at that, clearly challenged his sensibilities, but the evidence of his eyes was undeniable. The conversation that followed was stilted at first. Collins addressing Sarah, Sarah relaying to Nita, Nita responding through her, but gradually, as Nita began explaining water table management and soil conservation, Collins leaned forward, absorbed. "This is ancient knowledge." Collins breathed. "These techniques, they could transform territorial agriculture. Do you realize what this means?" "Means people eat," Nita said simply. "Land stays good for children's children. What else matters?" Collins left with a notebook full of observations and a radically altered perspective. Within a month, he was back with a proposal from the territorial government. They wanted to establish an agricultural station at Barranca Valley, a place where Nita's knowledge could be formally documented and disseminated. "They'll pay," Collins explained. "Salary for you both, funds for expansion, official recognition as territorial agricultural advisors." Sarah was speechless. From pariah to advisor in less than 2 years, it seemed impossible. "What do you think?" she asked Nita privately. His response was measured. "Government money comes with government rules. But if it helps more people learn, he paused. We accept, but on our terms. They come here. We teach our way. No soldiers, no forcing. The negotiations were delicate, but eventually agreement was reached. Barranca Valley became the territory's first official indigenous knowledge agricultural station, though the bureaucrats used fancier terms. Sarah was named director, with Nita as chief consultant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The cruel joke Kane had played, giving a paralyzed Apache to a desperate widow, had created the territory's most successful agricultural innovation. Kane himself had fallen far. His financial empire, built on fear and predatory lending, collapsed as people found hope and success elsewhere. The man who'd owned half of Sanctuary now skulked in shadows, his remaining supporters melting away like snow in spring. He came to Barranca Valley only once, near sunset on a day when dozens of farmers were attending one of Nita's teaching sessions. Sarah saw him standing at the gate, looking older, smaller, diminished. She approached cautiously. "Mr. Kane." He stared at the thriving valley, at the people gathered around Nita's ramada. "I gave you a dying man as an insult," he said quietly. "You turned him into this." "We turned each other into this," Sarah corrected. "That's what you never understood. Partnership, mutual respect, building instead of breaking." Kane's laugh was bitter. "I suppose you're waiting for an apology." "No," Sarah said. "I'm waiting for you to leave. This is no place for men who trade in cruelty." He left without another word, a broken king surveying a kingdom that had outgrown him. As autumn arrived, the valley hosted its first harvest gathering. People came from across the territory, Apache and Mexican, Anglo and Chinese, all united by curiosity and need. They shared food grown using Nita's methods, exchanged seeds and stories, created something unprecedented in the fractured territorial landscape. Sarah stood before the crowd, translating as Nita spoke from his place of honor. His voice was stronger now, carrying the authority of proven wisdom. "Many seasons ago, I was warrior, fought to keep white people from Apache land, lost that war, lost use of my body." He paused, letting Sarah catch up. "Thought life was over, waited to die." The crowd was silent, absorbed. Then learned new truth. Body broken, but mind whole. Knowledge lives, can still fight not with weapons, but with teaching. Not to push people away, but to show how all can live on this land without destroying it. He looked directly at Sarah. "This woman saved my body from fire. I helped save her land from drought. Together, we save more than both. We save possibility." The applause was thunderous, but Sarah barely heard it. She was remembering that first terrible day. Kane's mocking laughter, her own despair. How had they traveled from that moment to this? Later, as the gathering wound down and people prepared for night camping, Sarah sat beside Nita in the quiet ramada. Oil lamps cast gentle light, and somewhere a guitar played softly. "Did you imagine this?" she asked. "That day they brought you to my door?" "Imagine death," he admitted. "You—" "The same, death or madness or both." She smiled. "Instead, we got this." This was more than the valley, more than the recognition, more than the success. It was the bond between them, not romantic love, but something deeper. A connection forged in suffering and strengthened by shared purpose. They had saved each other and, in doing so, had saved countless others. "Sarah," Nita said suddenly, "must tell you something." She leaned closer, concerned by his serious tone. "The healers say, with new treatments from the East, might be possible. Some movement, not walking, but—" He moved his fingers slightly. "More than now." Sarah's heart leaped. "That's wonderful. We could—" "Could change everything," he interrupted. "If I could move more, might not need you same way, might want to leave, find my people." The thought hit her like cold water. In all their planning, all their success, she'd never contemplated Nita leaving. "Is that what you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. My people are scattered, some dead, some on reservations, some hiding in mountains. But you, this place, the people who come to learn. He met her eyes. This is my people now. All of them. All of us. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. We're family, strange, broken, unlikely family, but family nonetheless. Yes, Nita agreed. Family of choice, strongest kind. As the stars emerged overhead and the harvest celebration continued around them, Sarah and Nita sat in comfortable silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new possibilities. The experimental treatments might work or might fail. The valley would face droughts and floods and all the trials of desert living. But tonight, surrounded by the fruit of their unlikely partnership, they were content. The paralyzed warrior and the desperate widow had become something neither could have imagined: teachers, leaders, bridges between worlds. They had transformed Cain's cruel joke into a legacy of hope that would outlast them all. In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The desert was speaking, and finally, people were learning to listen. 5 years had passed since the fire that changed everything. The Ramada where Nita held court had grown into a proper schoolhouse, with walls that could be opened to let in the desert breeze and a specially designed chair that allowed him to sit upright for longer periods. The experimental treatments from the East had given him limited use of his hands enough to hold a pencil, to sketch the diagrams that had once existed only in his mind. On this particular evening, as the sun painted the mountains crimson, Sarah found him on the porch of their home, watching the valley with the satisfaction of a man surveying his life's work. The agricultural station had grown beyond their wildest dreams. Students came from as far as California and Texas to learn the ancient ways of working with the land. You're thinking deep thoughts, Sarah observed, settling into the chair beside him. Remembering, Nita said, his speech now clear though still careful. The day Cain brought me to your door. If someone had told me then that we'd be running the most successful agricultural program in the territory, Sarah smiled. That the woman who couldn't keep a garden alive would be teaching farming techniques to government officials. That the Apache who wanted to die would find reason to live, Nita added quietly. Would find home in enemy territory. Former enemy, Sarah corrected gently. Though I suppose we were never really enemies. Were we just two people caught in a world that wanted us to hate each other? A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that comes from years of partnership. In the distance, they could hear laughter from the dormitories where students stayed during their training. Tomorrow's class would be on water management, with delegates from 3 different tribes attending alongside the usual mix of settlers and farmers. Sarah, Nita said suddenly, need to ask you something. She turned to him, noting the serious tone. What is it? In all these years, you never... There were men who showed interest. Tom Garrett, that widower from Tucson. You never encouraged them. Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Would it surprise you to know I've been asked that question before? Martha Brennan seems particularly concerned about my unmarried state. And your answer? She looked out over the valley they'd built together. I told her the truth, that I already have a partnership. Not a marriage in the traditional sense, but something more, something deeper. She turned to face him. You and I, we've created something extraordinary together. Not just this place, but us, this connection we have. Why would I want anything else? Nita nodded slowly. I have felt same. Among my people, there are many kinds of bonds. Not all are between man and woman in romantic way. Some are between souls who choose to walk same path, share same purpose. He paused. You and I, we are, how do you say, 2 halves of one whole. Yes, Sarah whispered. Exactly that. The students call us grandfather and grandmother of the valley. Nita continued with a slight smile. But we are not married, not family by blood,
yet we are more family than many who share blood. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked. Not having a traditional life children of your own?
Nita gestured toward the valley with his partially mobile hand. Look at our children. Every student who learns, every family that thrives because of what we teach, these are our children. Our legacy is not in blood, but in knowledge passed on. In land that will feed generations because we showed them how to listen. As if to punctuate his words, young Mary Brennan, Martha's daughter, now grown and one of their most dedicated students, appeared on the path. Mrs. Hestwood Nita. The delegation from the Navajo Nation has arrived early. Should I get them settled?
Yes, thank you, Mary,
Sarah called back. Then, to Nita, remember when her mother was afraid to let her near you? Now she speaks 3 languages and can read water signs better than men who farmed 40 years. Nita said with pride, fear transforms to wisdom when given chance. As twilight deepened, they prepared for the evening meal. The dining hall would be full tonight, students, visitors, the permanent staff they'd hired to help run the expanding operation. But first, as was their custom, Sarah and Nita shared a quiet dinner on the porch.
I've been thinking about Cain,
Sarah said suddenly. Nita raised an eyebrow. They rarely spoke of the man whose cruelty had inadvertently brought them together. I heard he died last winter, alone, bitter, broken by his own hatred. She paused. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, but instead I just feel sad. He had so much power, so much potential to do good, and he wasted it all on cruelty and control. His gift to us was meant as curse, Nita observed. But we transformed it. Perhaps that is best revenge, to take ugliness and make it beautiful. Is that what we did made something beautiful? Nita looked at her with those dark eyes that had once held only hatred and now shone with warmth. What do you think? Sarah surveyed their domain, the thriving fields, the bustling school, the diverse community that had grown around their work. But mostly she looked at the man beside her, the warrior who'd become her dearest friend, her partner in all things, the other half of her soul. Yes, she said simply. We made something beautiful. As the stars emerged in the desert sky, other residents began gathering for the evening's activities. There would be lectures, demonstrations, shared meals, and stories. The Navajo delegation would exchange knowledge with Apache elders who'd started visiting regularly. Young farmers would learn from Mexican vaqueros who'd worked this land for generations, all brought together by an unlikely pair who'd refused to let cruelty have the last word. Time to go in, Sarah said, rising and moving to help Nita with his chair. He could manage it himself now, with the improvements they'd made. But she helped anyway, not because he needed it, but because it was their ritual, their dance of mutual support. Sarah, he said as they paused at the door. Want you to know? I know, she interrupted gently. I have always known. He nodded, understanding passing between them without need for words. They'd never spoken of love in romantic terms, never crossed certain boundaries. But what they had transcended those limitations. They'd built something unique, a partnership of minds and souls, a collaboration that had transformed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone their work touched. Inside, the warm light and welcoming voices drew them into the community they'd created. Students rushed to help with Nita's chair, eager for the evening's lessons. Visiting dignitaries waited respectfully, having learned that wisdom came in unexpected packages. The hall hummed with purposeful energy, with hope made manifest. As Sarah took her place beside Nita at the head table, she caught sight of their reflection in the window glass. A gray-haired woman, worn by sun and work, but strengthened by purpose. A still paralyzed warrior whose physical limitations had become irrelevant in the face of his vast knowledge and teaching gift. They looked like what they were: partners, teachers, family of choice. Ready? She asked, as she did every evening. Ready? He confirmed, as he always did. The evening session began, voices rising and falling in multiple languages as knowledge flowed like water in the desert precious. life-giving, transformative, and at the center of it all, two people who'd found in each other not what they'd expected or what society dictated, but exactly what they needed. The broken widow and the paralyzed warrior had become something neither could have imagined that first terrible day. They'd become whole, not by healing their individual wounds, but by choosing to be broken together, and in that choosing, finding strength neither possessed alone. As the desert stars wheeled overhead and the sounds of learning and community filled the night, Sarah and Nita continued their life's work, proof that the deepest connections aren't always the ones we plan for, but the ones that grow from shared struggle, mutual respect, and the courage to see beyond what is to what could be. Their love story would never fit the conventional mold. There would be no passionate kisses, no wedding bells, no children who bore their combined features. But in creating a place where enemies became friends, where ancient wisdom saved modern lives, where two broken people showed that wholeness comes from connection rather than independence, they'd written a love story for the ages. Not all love stories end with "I do." Some end with "we did," and those, perhaps, are the most powerful stories of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this journey through the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And if you'd really like to help more people discover this story, please hit the hype button to boost this video. Your support means the world and helps keep these authentic Western tales alive. Until our next adventure in the frontier, partners.